In this lifetime, Ethan Carter said he wanted to stay by his childhood sweetheart, Lily Moore's side. Without hesitation, I packed my bags and returned to the city. He told me he didn't want to settle down before establishing his career. I immediately agreed to my parents' arrangement to marry someone they introduced to me. Later, he came to me with a condition. If I could help Lily find a job, he would marry me. By then, I was already pregnant, accompanying my husband on a visit to a youth program in Lily's town when I unexpectedly ran into him. At that moment, his eyes turned red. His voice trembled as he questioned me. "Didn't we agree that you would wait for me?" Wait, what a joke. I, the daughter of a well-established and powerful family, was supposed to wait for a man with nothing to his name? Dad, Mom, I plan to return to the city in a week, and I'm willing to marry James Harrison. There was a noticeable pause on the other end of the line before my mother let out an excited exclamation. "Mia, is this true? Have you really thought it through? You're really done entangling yourself with that poor boy Ethan Carter? You're really coming back to the city, back to us, and willing to get closer to James?" I nodded and emphasized, "James is a great man. There's no need to hesitate. I'm willing to marry him." In my past life, when I was betrayed and left to die by Ethan and Lily, it was James who comforted my grieving parents. It was he who arranged my burial and cleared my name. It was he who supported my parents for the rest of their lives. Such kindness, bearing his children, wouldn't even be enough to repay him. Besides, we had known each other since childhood. Marrying him, I was more than willing. "Good, that's good," my mother said quickly. "I'll buy you a ticket right away. I'll inform the Harrisons. We'll start arranging your wedding immediately." I could hear the emotion in her voice, the suppressed sobs she tried to hold back. My father sighed repeatedly on the other end of the call. I knew they had always been worried about me, worried that my love would go unanswered, that I would suffer by Ethan's side, that I wouldn't be able to endure the hardships of rural life. It was my fault. In my past life, I had foolishly abandoned the parents who loved me so dearly, all for a man who never truly cherished me. "Dad, Mom, from now on, I will listen to you. I'll stay by your side and be the filial daughter you deserve. This time, I will be happy, I swear it. I've made it clear to Sophie," Ethan's voice carried from the hallway as I returned from the phone booth. "If she can't secure a transfer for you back to the city, I won't go back with her either. She should be working on getting you a spot now." I had just stepped back into the faculty dormitory when I heard Ethan's gentle reassurance to Rachel Lane. "Ethan, I'm sorry for putting you through this," Rachel said softly, her eyes slightly red. "Sophie is probably going to argue with you about this again. You two just made up." Ethan shook his head and comforted her. "Your parents passed away early. We grew up together. I've always seen you as my little sister. It's only right for a big brother to take care of his sister. Sophie should be more understanding about this." At the mention of the word sister, a flicker of disappointment crossed Rachel's eyes, but she quickly regained her usual charming expression. "If all goes well," she said, "we should be able to return to the city with them in a week. I should also inform my students and colleagues before we leave." "Yeah," Ethan agreed. "Sophie's family has influence. As long as she speaks up, getting a transfer shouldn't be an issue. We've been here for 3 years, and we've received a lot of kindness from the people here. We should say our goodbyes properly, otherwise, it would seem too cold." Rachel offered a suggestion. "I was thinking, since my birthday is in a couple of days, I could invite the faculty and the leadership to a small gathering. That way, we can bid farewell in a proper manner." Ethan was supportive of the idea. "It's just," she hesitated, "I'm a bit short on money right now. Ethan, could you lend me some?" Before Ethan could respond, Rachel tapped her forehead and laughed. "Oh, I almost forgot. You already spent last month's salary helping students from struggling families. This is embarrassing." Ethan thought for a moment. "It's fine. Sophie should still have some. I'll ask her for a little to help you out." Rachel's smile deepened. "Thank you, Ethan. And please thank Sophie for me too." Ethan affectionately patted her head, his eyes filled with indulgence. That was when I stepped into the female faculty dormitory, breaking the moment. "Sophie, you're back." Rachel greeted me sweetly. I ignored her. Ethan frowned, but unlike before, he didn't scold me for being impolite. He reached out his hand to me and said, "In 2 days, Rachel's birthday is coming up, and she wants to host a small celebration. At the same time, we'll use it as a farewell gathering with the school's faculty and staff. We don't have enough money. Do you have any to spare?" I continued packing my luggage, my voice cold. Ethan Carter curled his lips. "How could you not have money? Didn't you just get paid?" I looked up at him and replied flatly, "I spent it just like you did. However I wanted." Ethan pursed his lips. Beside him, Rachel's eyes flickered before she stepped forward, grabbing my arm and sweetly coaxing, "Sophie, we're all going back to the city soon, right? So I thought, since it's my birthday, why not take the chance to host a farewell dinner? It's a way to say goodbye properly to the colleagues we've worked with for 3 years. Ethan and I already used our salaries to help a few struggling students, so we really have no choice but to trouble you." How amusing. Using her birthday as an excuse for a farewell banquet? A farewell banquet is a farewell banquet. Why did she have to tie it to her birthday? No money to help struggling students, yet still eager to throw a dinner party and act generous? I responded coolly, "It's not really a problem." Seeing that I didn't outright refuse, Rachel's face lit up with visible delight. "Sophie, since you said that, I guess our return to the city is pretty much settled, right?" Ethan let out a sigh of relief. "Then I'll go reserve a private room at Intercontinental Restaurant. This afternoon, I'll inform the faculty and staff in the office. Including the 3 of us, it'll be about 20 people. $30 should be enough." As he spoke, he deliberately glanced at me, clearly waiting to see if I'd be willing to cover the $30. Rachel noticed that I didn't react much, so she quickly added, "Most of the guests are male colleagues, and they'll probably want to drink. $30 might not be enough. Sophie, $60 would make sure everyone eats well." I nodded along with her words. Seeing this, she smiled even more triumphantly. Ethan seemed uneasy about it but didn't say anything. I added, "Since it's a birthday celebration, there should be a cake, don't you think?" Ethan immediately objected. "Cakes are too expensive. Forget it. Besides, there aren't any bakeries here in the countryside." Rachel's eyes lit up with excitement. "No, Ethan, I've never had a birthday cake in my whole life. If Sophie says she can get one, then she must have a way. I really want to try one." Ethan hesitated and turned to look at me. I remained expressionless. "Of course I have a way. I had the contact information of a baker in the city. If I called him, he could probably arrange for a cake delivery." Rachel was overjoyed, practically spinning in circles from excitement. Seeing her so happy, Ethan didn't argue further about the cost of the cake or how much it would take to get it delivered from the city to this rural town. Just as he was about to leave the female faculty dormitory, he turned back and said to me in an unusually gentle tone, "It feels like you've matured a lot overnight. I'm really glad to see you treating Rachel this way. I'll talk to my mom soon and arrange for our families to meet as soon as possible." I shook my head. "There's no need." His voice grew serious. "My mom may not think highly of you, but I still hope you can change her opinion. I'll be by your side, and we'll work on this together." I almost laughed. Ethan's mother, illiterate, sickly, and disabled, what right did she have to look down on me? He continued, "Also, talk to your parents. When they meet my mom, they should try to be humble. That way, both families can sit down and have a proper discussion about our marriage." My parents had been upright revolutionaries their entire lives, never bowing to anyone. Why would they need to lower themselves in front of Ethan Carter's mother? That afternoon, when I arrived at the office, Ethan had already announced the farewell gathering to everyone. The faculty members looked excited about it, and Rachel eagerly urged me to use the school's public telephone booth to call the city bakery. I didn't disappoint her. During the break, I contacted the baker and ordered the largest cake available, enough for 20 people. I instructed them to decorate it as extravagantly as possible, to include candles and disposable plates, and to write on it, "Happy 23rd birthday, Rachel." "And I also want one of those little music boxes that plays the happy birthday song," I added. "Have it delivered to Intercontinental State-owned restaurant on Mulberry Street, Honghu Town, at 6:30 p.m. Just let the front desk staff know, and someone will come out to pick up the cake." Rachel stood beside me, listening to the list of requests I was giving the baker, her face full of excitement. When I finally hung up the phone, she grabbed my hand, her eyes slightly red. "Sophie, you're truly the best. This birthday party is going to be absolutely perfect." I didn't respond, letting her bask in her emotions alone. "Sophie, after you marry Ethan, could you introduce me to a good match too? That rich older brother from your family? Does he have a girlfriend? I heard his family has been in the military for generations. If there's a chance, I'd love to see you every day." I curled my lips into a smirk. Where did she get the audacity? Just then, the class bell rang, and we each went to our respective classrooms. 2 days later, on Rachel's birthday, she took the day off from school despite it being the middle of the semester. She went to the county town to buy a new dress, got her hair done, and even put on makeup. At 6:30 p.m., a group of us walked out of the school together and saw her standing at the restaurant entrance greeting guests. When she saw the faculty leaders, she enthusiastically welcomed them. "You look lovely. Happy birthday." Some thoughtful female colleagues even brought her small gifts. Rachel accepted them with a bright smile, unable to contain her delight. A large group of us filed into the restaurant. Ethan took charge like the host, calling the waitstaff to bring out the dishes. Plates of chicken, duck, and fish were served alongside steaming bowls of soup. The room was lively, filled with laughter and conversation as everyone enjoyed the meal. Rachel and Ethan played the central roles, leading the atmosphere while the others chimed in to keep the energy up. They celebrated Rachel's birthday while also announcing their impending departure from the school. The small private dining room buzzed with excitement. I sat quietly among them, focusing on my food while waiting for the show to unfold. Sitting beside me, Mr. Zhao, one of the teachers, leaned in and muttered, "After all those fights with Ethan, he's still so close to Rachel. Have you given in? Are you planning to spend the rest of your life stuck in this 3-person arrangement?" I shook my head, but he didn't believe me. "This meal must cost at least $100, he continued. "Rachel spends all her money on flashy outfits. She definitely couldn't afford it. Ethan has a sick mother at home. Even if he helps Rachel out occasionally, he wouldn't be able to cover this bill. So after thinking about it, I can only assume it's you. Are you really just letting this slide?" Mr. Zhao was older than me. Years ago, he divorced his wife after discovering she had cheated on him. Ever since, he had seen relationships with a sharp and cynical eye. I figured he was saying this because he didn't want me to end up in the same mess he had. I chuckled. "Don't worry, I'm not stupid." Mr. Zhao raised an eyebrow. "You're not stupid? It's already hard enough for you to bring Ethan back to the city, and now you've got Rachel tagging along too? Who knows if your parents have had to go bow and scrape at the relevant offices just to make arrangements for you?" I lowered my voice. "That won't happen. I'm not that unfilial. Rachel isn't going to the city, and neither is Ethan." Mr. Zhao was stunned. Just then, the door swung open, and a waiter stepped in. "Who ordered a cake from the city?" "The baker's waiting outside." Rachel instantly lit up. "Me. I'll go get it and share it with everyone." Cake was a rare luxury here. Not many people had ever tasted one. The moment the word cake was mentioned, everyone's eyes gleamed with excitement. "This is amazing, I get to eat cake. I've never even seen a real cake before. What a treat. I should eat a little less and take a piece home for my kid. He's always asking for cake." Even the waiter, who had never seen such a large cake before, chimed in enthusiastically. "This one's huge. No way you won't have enough to go around." "There's more than enough for everyone. Even after you've all had your share, you can each take a piece home." "Wow, that's a huge cake. It must have cost a fortune." "Rachel, this is quite the birthday celebration. You really went all out." Rachel beamed with pride and followed the waiter out of the private room. Ethan trailed behind her, probably worried the cake was too big for her to carry alone. "I'll go help," he said. With the two of them gone, the atmosphere in the room settled a bit. Mr. Zhao glanced at me, eyes full of curiosity, as if waiting for something interesting to unfold. It wasn't long before Ethan returned. He walked straight to my side and lowered his voice. "Step outside for a second. The baker said the person who ordered the cake needs to sign for it." I remained seated, unmoving. "Didn't Rachel order the cake? She can sign for it." Ethan's expression darkened. But you were the one who called and placed the order. The baker is still waiting. Don't hold things up, just come sign for it. I let out a soft chuckle. I made the call, but Rachel was the one who wanted the cake. Wouldn't it be inappropriate for me to sign? Ethan pressed his lips together tightly. Just then, Rachel walked back in, looking a little pale. Sophie, please come out and sign for it. Let's just get the cake inside so everyone can enjoy it. We finally got everyone together. It'd be a shame to ruin the mood. I sat firmly in my chair and replied steadily. Exactly. Hurry up and bring the cake in so everyone can have some. They've all been waiting. Mr. Zhao, being a sharp man, immediately caught on to what was happening. He spoke up bluntly. Rachel, don't tell me you're expecting Sophie to pay for it. Usually cakes were paid for upon delivery, but wasn't this her birthday? Why should Sophie be the one footing the bill? Rachel's face instantly fell. I didn't mean. Ethan stepped in to explain. Sophie, didn't you promise to get Rachel a birthday cake? Now that the cake is here, you're backing out? I feigned surprise. Oh, I promised to buy her a cake? A cake like that costs at least $200. My monthly salary isn't even $30. How could I afford something so expensive? Mr. Zhao raised an eyebrow. Ha, so inviting everyone to cake meant making someone else pay for it. The expressions of the other guests darkened. The delivery man, who had been waiting outside for far too long, finally lost his patience and stepped in. His face was filled with annoyance. So whose cake is this? Is someone paying or not? The total is $231. I drove 2 hours from the city to deliver this. Don't tell me I wasted my time. Rachel's eyes welled up with tears. She grabbed my hand and pleaded, Sophie, we agreed on this. Why are you only saying now that you don't have the money? I sighed, looking helpless. I assumed you had the money. I didn't realize you expected me to pay. I hurriedly reached into my pocket and pulled out all the loose change I had, counting it carefully. I only have $3.65. I turned to the others. How about we all pitch in? Let's collect enough to cover the cake. It's Rachel's birthday after all. She should be able to enjoy it. Before I could finish my sentence, Mr. Zhao let out a sarcastic laugh. Who carries that kind of cash around? At most, we might have a few bucks each. Even if we all pitch in, we'd barely reach $60. This cake costs over $200. Who's gonna come up with the rest? Besides, he continued, even if someone did have that much, who in their right mind would spend it on cake? That much money could buy a fridge or a television, way more practical than a cake. The others nodded in agreement. We make $29.90 a month. Who can afford a $200 cake? $3 is enough to feed my family for a week. I'd rather skip the cake than waste my money on it. What a joke. Just because Sophie's family has money doesn't mean she should drop over $200 just like that. Rachel's face turned red as everyone's complaints piled up. She tugged on Ethan's sleeve. Ethan, Sophie, she's going back on her word. What do I do now? Ethan, frustrated, turned his anger on me. Sophie, if you didn't want to buy the cake, you could have just said so. Now it's already ordered, and the delivery guy needs to be paid. You have to give him the money. Mr. Zhao turned to Ethan Carter. You just said you don't have any money, so what's your plan now? Ethan glared at me fiercely. Sophie, if you don't pay, we're done. You can forget about marrying me in this lifetime. I let out a cold laugh. Break up? Didn't we already break up a long time ago? The moment you refused to go back to the city with me, I considered us over. Ethan froze. What? When did I refuse to go back with you? Rachel quickly jumped in to explain. No. Ethan said that as long as Sophie arranged for me to go to the city too, he'd go with you. I spread my hands. The city transfer spots are limited. I can't make that happen. So after all that talk about going back to the city, you were relying on me to make it happen? I thought you had found another way. Oh dear, what a huge misunderstanding. Looks like this farewell dinner won't be much of a farewell after all. Ethan and Rachel both looked unsteady on their feet. The other teachers in the room, who had been holding back, finally couldn't contain themselves. I was wondering why their names weren't on the transfer list. Turns out they were waiting for Sophie to arrange it for them. This is ridiculous. They expect Sophie to pay for the cake, and now they want her to handle their city transfer too? What are they, leeches? Next thing you know, they'll expect her to pay for this meal too. Mr. Zhao let out a mocking laugh. So this is how it works: host a dinner, and then expect someone else to foot the bill. Interesting approach. Then he turned to the waiter. Go ahead and calculate the total for the meal. The waiter's expression stiffened, realizing the situation had taken a serious turn. He quickly called over the restaurant owner. The owner punched numbers into the calculator, rounded off the total, and announced, food comes to $59, drinks are $67. Altogether, that's $126. Who's paying? Mr. Zhao took out his wallet and placed $3 on the counter. I didn't drink, so I'll cover my share. The owner accepted it and then looked toward the rest of the group. Several female teachers who hadn't touched the alcohol quickly followed suit, each handing over $3. Mr. Zhao also took the $3 I had placed on the table and gave it to the owner. The owner's gaze swept over the remaining people. What about the rest? The male teachers who had been drinking were visibly furious. Their faces turned red as they started cursing. You invite us to dinner, and now we have to pay out of our own pockets? I just spent my own damn money celebrating your birthday? You ungrateful bastard, you're lucky as hell to even be hanging around Sophie, and yet you're still fooling around with Rachel. And you, Rachel, what the hell is wrong with you? Acting all high and mighty when you can't even pay for your own damn cake? One of them slammed his fist on the table. No way in hell am I covering this bill. Let Rachel figure it out. Maybe she can work it off in the kitchen. The insults flew one after another. The female teachers and I quickly left the private dining room. Ethan, unable to bear the humiliation, finally lost his temper and threw a punch. Chaos erupted as the restaurant staff rushed in to break up the fight. In the midst of the commotion, Rachel managed to slip out unnoticed. But the cake delivery man was still there, and he wasn't letting her go. He grabbed her arm, demanding payment. Rachel stammered, I haven't even touched the cake. You can take it back. I don't have any money. The delivery man, enraged, grabbed a plate of unfinished food and hurled it at her. No money, and you're ordering cake? Are you insane? Rachel stared in horror at her brand new dress, now stained with food. She completely broke down, sobbing, It's ruined. It's all ruined. The chaos in the restaurant eventually drew the attention of the local patrol officers. They barged in and took everyone to the station. After questioning everyone, the police ruled that Ethan was responsible for compensating the restaurant $200 for damages. Rachel and the male teachers who had been drinking had to split the $100 food and alcohol tab. As for the cake, since Rachel had placed the order but I had made the call, the police deemed I was partially responsible. I ended up handing the delivery man over $100 and took half the cake with me. That night, the families of the other male teachers arrived to pay their fines and bail them out. But Ethan and Rachel? No one came for them. When I left the station, they were still inside, writing their statements. Not only had Rachel's night gone completely sideways, Ethan was going down with her. Well, Rachel really set herself up for this one. She even invited the school leaders. Looks like she hit a brick wall this time. They're not just going to be locked up for a few days over a few $100, someone added. Even if they get out, their jobs are as good as gone. Mr. Zhao and the other female teachers casually chatted as they enjoyed their slices of cake. After leaving the police station, I invited them to a small tea house nearby to share the cake. Since it was their first time eating cake, even after all the chaos, they were still in a good mood. This must have felt satisfying for you, huh? One of them asked. Make sure you don't look back. Exactly. A man like Ethan Carter will never make a good husband, another chimed in. Go home and let your parents set you up with someone decent. There must be plenty of outstanding young men just waiting for you to pick from. By then, Ethan will regret it, losing someone as reliable as you. I chuckled. Who knows? Maybe this is a relief for him too. Now he can openly be with Rachel. Mr. Zhao shook his head. Do you know why they call Rachel Fat Rachel? I shrugged. No idea, he explained. It's not about her weight. It's because her family has been waiting in fear. Her parents desperately wanted a son. Their favoritism toward boys runs deep. Even if Ethan and Rachel have feelings for each other, do you think her parents would ever agree to let their daughter marry a broke man like Ethan? They're waiting for Rachel to marry into a wealthy family so their whole household can rise in status. Another teacher agreed. Those two may seem close, but deep down, neither of them is willing to give up their future. Ethan won't truly want Rachel, and Rachel looks down on Ethan. Trust me, they'll probably end up tangled in this ambiguous mess for the rest of their lives. Leaving Ethan and Rachel behind, we talked about all the funny and memorable moments from the past few years. Over tea and cake, nostalgia filled the air. After all, I was leaving soon, and I likely wouldn't have a reason to return. Despite everything with Ethan and Rachel, my other colleagues had treated me well, especially the female teachers. 3 days later, I boarded the bus back to the city, holding on to the farewell gifts from my colleagues. There was a hand-knitted scarf, locally made sweets, and even a box full of folded paper stars for my students. I planned to keep them all. They were a part of my memories, the happiness, the struggles, the pain. It was all a part of my youth. As the bus pulled away, I waved to my colleagues one last time. It was a touching moment. That is, until Ethan appeared. Not only did he show up, but he actually ran after the bus, chasing it down several streets. He kept shouting my name, yelling for the bus to stop. But this wasn't his bus. What right did he have to demand it to wait for him? Eventually, the bus sped up, leaving him behind. I watched as he fell further and further back until he finally couldn't keep up. He threw his head back and let out a desperate roar. Through the window, through the wind and the noise of the city, I thought I could faintly make out his words, "You understand me." But what was I supposed to wait for? If I was waiting for anything, I was probably just waiting for him to disappear from my life entirely. When I arrived at the station, the first thing I saw from a distance was a military vehicle parked nearby. Standing beside it was James Harrison. Dressed in his perfectly pressed uniform, he looked upright and imposing, a figure that naturally stood out from the crowd. As I passed by, people of all ages, men, women, young and old, couldn't help but steal glances at him. In the past, my heart had been so completely occupied by Ethan that I had overlooked the person who had always been by my side, the childhood friend who had watched over me all these years. Compared to Ethan's family background, James was leagues ahead. Compared to Ethan's appearance, James was far superior. Compared to Ethan's character, James was even more incomparable. So why in the past had I been so blind? I let out a quiet, self-mocking laugh. James had already reached for my luggage, taking it from my hands with ease. "Sophie," he said with a warm smile, "have you been waiting long?" I had already arranged for time off, but something came up last minute and delayed me. "I hope you're not mad." I shook my head. "Not at all. I just stepped out of the station and saw you. You're right on time." Hearing that, he smiled, his cheeks slightly flushed. He actually looked a little shy. "Your parents told me you were coming back to marry me," James said. "At first, I didn't believe it. Even when my parents and I brought the betrothal gifts to your house, I still couldn't be sure. I was afraid you were just acting out of anger." His expression turned serious as he looked at me. "Sophie, if marrying me makes you uncomfortable, I won't hold it against you. As long as you're happy, that's all that matters." I tilted my head up, catching the glimmer of unshed tears in his eyes. He had always been so considerate, always thinking about me in every way possible. "Do you think you can't make me happy?" "No, of course not," he said quickly. I heard that you went to the countryside for Ethan Carter, that you refused to return to the city because of him. So you think my happiness doesn't lie with you?" I asked, watching him closely. "Or maybe you resent me for having been in love with someone else?" "No, never," he blurted out, suddenly flustered. For a moment his words got tangled on his tongue. It reminded me of my past life, when I had been framed by Rachel and accused of impropriety, when I was locked away and humiliated. James had traveled miles to testify for me, to clear my name. I took a deep breath and wrapped my arms around his solid waist. "James," I said softly, "if you don't like me, we can call off the engagement. But if you do, please don't say anything that would push me away." He stiffened for a second. Then his voice came out slightly trembling. "I would never push you away, Sophie. I promise." 1 week later, James and I were engaged. 3 months later, we got married. Even though the Harrison family had already prepared a house for us, even furnishing it to make sure we would be comfortable, I still chose to live with my parents for the time being. After all, James was often away on assignments, and staying home meant I could spend more time with my family. His parents were understanding and had no objections. Besides, our houses were right next to each other. Seeing each other wouldn't be difficult. James, however, had his own thoughts. Whenever he was home, he would roll around on my bed and grin, saying, "I've had my eye on this bed since we were kids. I used to dream about lying here." I smirked at him. "So you've had improper thoughts about me for a long time?" He chuckled. I pushed further. "Since when exactly?" He kissed me on the cheek and whispered, "Hard to say. Don't tell me it started when I was still in elementary school," I teased. "Of course not," he said with a grin. "You were in elementary school, but I was only in middle school, okay? Back then, I just thought my little neighbor was adorable and that I wanted to protect her." I raised an eyebrow. "And that feeling lasted until I grew up?" He nodded. "Probably around my first year of high school. A girl confessed to me, and when she asked what kind of girl I liked, the first person that came to mind was you." My cheeks heated up, and I smacked him with a pillow. "You were in high school. I was still in middle school," he laughed. "Middle school isn't that young." For a moment, his expression turned serious. "There was a time when I really regretted not protecting you better, but I'm grateful that you came back." He pulled me into his embrace, his breath warm against my ear. Our breaths intertwined, blurring the space between us. A month after James left for a mission, I found out I was pregnant. When he got the news, he was so desperate to see me that he nearly wanted to hijack a plane to fly back. I reassured him, telling him to focus on his work. There were plenty of people taking care of me. He didn't need to worry. But still, he cried. Like a child. "I'm sorry," he choked out. "I'm so sorry. I can't be by your side while you're pregnant, and I might not even make it back when you give birth. The thought of you suffering through the pain alone, losing sleep because of this child, and me not being able to do anything. I feel useless. I promise I'll be more careful in the future. I'll make sure you never have to suffer again." Later, his parents told me that James had always been someone who thought too much. He believed that because of his career, he didn't deserve to have love. It was only after I rejected him the first time that he enlisted in the military. And later, when I changed my mind. For a long time, James struggled with his feelings. He knew all too well what his career would mean for his partner, the loneliness, the waiting, the constant worry. But at the same time, he couldn't bear to let me go. At one point, he even felt he was being selfish. Hearing this shook me to my core. I couldn't calm myself for a long time. As my thoughts drifted to my husband, the father of my child, my emotions shifted in ways I couldn't quite describe. I wrote him letters. I called him whenever I had the chance. I wanted him to know that no matter where he was, I was standing firmly behind him. I wanted him to know that he had taken root in my heart deeply and permanently. And more than anything, I wanted him to know to protect himself, to cherish his life. Because I would always be here, waiting for him to come home. 9 months into my pregnancy, my belly was already quite large. But when I heard that James's current station was only 3 hours away in Honghu Town, I couldn't hold back. I immediately got on a bus to visit him. The 3-hour journey was exhausting, but more than anything, I was excited. He stood at the entrance of Honghu Town, straight like a pine tree. Even in the freezing winds of midwinter, he didn't shrink back in the slightest. As soon as I got off the bus, his eyes turned red. When he spoke, his voice was choked with emotion. "Are you tired? Did you get carsick?" I shook my head, and for some reason, tears suddenly streamed down my face. I was so happy. So why was I crying? He immediately draped his coat over me and hurried me into the military vehicle, shielding me from the cold as we headed toward the base. It was only a 10-minute ride, yet by the time we arrived, his tears had already soaked through his collar. "The last time I saw you, your belly was still flat," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "And now, it's already this big. My love, you've suffered so much." Seeing him act like a child made me laugh through my tears, but being cared for by him like this, it was warm, reassuring. That afternoon, James told me he had to visit a school in Honghu Town. Supplies had arrived, and they needed to be escorted to the young teachers working in the countryside. He asked if I wanted to come along. James knew how much I missed my old colleagues and students. He had heard me talk about them countless times. At the same time, he also mentioned that Ethan Carter was at the school. He was worried I might feel uncomfortable, so he left the choice up to me. But I didn't hesitate. "Why would I feel awkward?" I said. "I'm doing great now. If anything, he should be the one feeling awkward." That afternoon, I rode with James to the school. The moment my former colleagues saw me, they were completely stunned. "It hasn't even been that long since we last saw you, and your belly's already this big? Oh my God. I heard you got married as soon as you went back, but I didn't believe it. Now I have no choice but to believe it. The man who helped you out of the car just now, he's your husband, right? Wow. He's so handsome." Mr. Zhao and the other teachers teased me while also making sure I wasn't too cold, quickly leading me into the office. Just before entering, I hesitated for a moment. Mr. Zhao immediately reassured me. "Don't worry. Ethan and Rachel were fired from the school a long time ago. They have no place in this office." Then, he started filling me in on what had happened to them. After Ethan hit one of the school leaders, he lost his job the moment he was released from the police station. He spent a long time looking for another job, but no one would hire him. In the end, the principal took pity on him and let him work as a janitor at the school. He had been doing it for a year now. He never gave up hope that he could return to being a teacher. So he worked tirelessly, trying to win over the school leaders. At the same time, he was desperate for another chance to go back to the city. He secretly saved up his wages, hoping to use them to bribe the higher-ups. But the school officials weren't interested in his little stash of money. Instead, they encouraged him to send Rachel away, promising him an opportunity in return. And Ethan actually listened to them. By then, Rachel had already started dating a well-off local man and was preparing to marry into his family. But Ethan's actions ruined everything for her. Furious, Rachel demanded compensation from him. Ethan, in turn, promised that as soon as he returned to the city and won me back, he would give Rachel all the money she wanted. He even promised to introduce her to a better match, someone who could truly help her marry into wealth. Rachel was just foolish. After breaking up with her boyfriend, she shamelessly tried to ingratiate herself with the school officials. But after an entire year, Ethan still hadn't managed to return to the city, and Rachel had been publicly beaten 3 times by the wife of one of the school leaders. Realizing that her reputation was beyond saving, Rachel demanded that Ethan marry her. But Ethan had no interest in her whatsoever. Their messy entanglement continued until Rachel ended up pregnant, and she had no idea whose child it was. Ethan wanted her to get an abortion, but just as they were about to go through with it, Rachel's parents found out. They brought an entire group of relatives from their hometown, forcing Ethan to pay up and marry her. Ethan ended up handing over all the wages he had earned that year, and even signed an IOU for several $1,000s in betrothal money. No one knew what had happened to them since then. Rumor had it that Rachel had turned to a less than respectable profession to make a living. As for Ethan, he was still working in the school kitchen. The two of them lived together, without status, without recognition. It was a mess. Just as we were talking about them, the office door opened and in walked Ethan, dressed in janitor's overalls. He had come to get his paycheck signed by the school leadership. But the moment his eyes landed on me, surrounded by my colleagues, his grip on his paperwork loosened and the documents slipped from his hands. His eyes instantly reddened. "Sophie?" I scoffed, not even bothering to acknowledge him. But he rushed toward me anyway. Mr. Zhao immediately stepped in front of me, shielding me. "What do you think you're doing, Ethan?" he said sharply. "Sophie is a military wife now. Her husband is an officer. Don't you dare entertain any thoughts you shouldn't." Ethan stared at me in a daze. You're married?" His gaze then dropped to my obviously rounded belly and his voice trembled. But you said you'd wait for me. Why didn't you wait for me?" Tears rolled down his face. It was disgusting. Just then, James stepped into the office, having finished his business. Without hesitation, he walked straight toward me. "I just spoke with my team," he said gently. "I've been granted leave. We can go home now." His presence was like a breath of fresh air, instantly clearing away the filth in my sight. I immediately walked up to him. "Okay, let's go." He took my hand and politely bid farewell to Mr. Zhao and the others. Wait. Ethan suddenly called out, his voice desperate. I have something to say to you. James raised an eyebrow and pulled me slightly behind him, his posture protective. What do you need to say to my wife? Standing face to face, James towered over Ethan by a full head. The sharp presence of his military uniform weighed down on the room, making Ethan visibly uneasy. James smirked slightly. If you have something to discuss with Sophie, we won't keep you. Our home is at 56 Camphor Road, Ningzhou. Feel free to visit any time. Ethan's face turned an ugly shade of black. Mr. Zhao and the others gasped in shock. A mansion? James led me out of the office and into the car. Once the doors shut, I instinctively reached out and gave him a light slap on the arm. 56 Camphor Road? Isn't that the property assigned to your commanding officer? Why were you bragging just to piss him off? He raised an eyebrow and casually lifted his shoulder, revealing his new insignia. Haven't had the chance to tell you yet, I was just promoted. Pretty impressive, huh? I widened my eyes. Are you serious? What did you do? How did you suddenly become a commander? His lips curled into a smile. This last mission, I was deployed for 8 months. I earned a first-class merit. My breath caught. My hands instinctively reached out to check him over. And sure enough, as I ran my fingers over his chest, I found a hole in his uniform. Lifting the fabric, I saw the twisted, jagged scar beneath it. In that moment, my entire body went hot with emotion. What first-class merit? I bit my lip, my hands trembling as I touched the scar. Who asked you to do that? He sighed. I didn't go out there looking for merit. I was just doing my job. It just happened. Then, as if trying to lighten the mood, he said, Oh, and about 56 Camphor Road, that is our new home. Just got assigned. If you want to move in, we can. If you don't, it's fine too. I turned my head away, blinking rapidly to stop my tears. But before I could say anything, he cupped my face and wiped away a tear with his thumb. Hey, don't cry. I'm sorry, he said quickly. Just now, I was too focused on showing off in front of that idiot and didn't think about how you'd feel. His voice softened. Don't cry, baby. I'm here now, and the little one is still in your belly. I sobbed so hard I could barely breathe. What if you had died? Would I have become a widow? No, that would never happen. James reassured me quickly. When I got shot, all I could think about was you. The moment I thought of you, I knew I had to stay alive. Before he could finish his sentence, a sharp pain suddenly seized my belly. My breath caught. The tears were forgotten. James, I gasped, panic rising. Hospital. We need to get to the hospital. I'm going into labor. James's expression shifted instantly. Without hesitation, he shouted at the driver to head to the hospital. And just like that, it was his turn to start crying. After 5 grueling hours, our daughter was born, both mother and child safe and sound. As James cradled our newborn girl and showered her with kisses, the driver who had rushed us to the hospital took the opportunity to grumble to both sets of parents. You have no idea, he said dramatically. First, it was the madam crying. Her sobs practically rattled my soul. Then it was the deputy commander's turn. And let me tell you, his wailing nearly made my heart stop. I've never been so terrified driving a car in my life. Because of our baby's birth, James was granted a slightly longer leave. But with his responsibilities piling up, he inevitably had to return to duty. As his wife, I understood. I could only support him from behind the scenes. As time passed and our child grew day by day, many of the young people who had been sent to the countryside finally returned to the city. The moment Mr. Zhao came back, he immediately sought me out. During our reunion, we reminisced about old times, and naturally, the topic of Ethan Carter and Rachel came up. Apparently, the two had eventually gotten married and registered their marriage. But their life was miserable. They argued every day. Then, one day, over $2, Ethan snapped and stabbed Rachel to death. Because the crime was so heinous, Ethan was arrested and sentenced to execution. Mr. Zhao sighed. See? You made the right choice. You got married early, had a beautiful child, your in-laws treat you well, your parents are happy, and your husband is an amazing man. Every time we talk about you, we're all so envious. I laughed. It's been so long, should I introduce you to someone? Mr. Zhao waved a hand, scoffing. No. Marriage is just a game of probability. I wasn't as lucky as you. After our chat, I asked the driver who had been assisting James to give Mr. Zhao a ride home. Somehow, over time, Mr. Zhao and that very same driver kept in touch, and not long after, he remarried. Even though he had always been resistant to the idea of a second marriage, fate has a funny way of working. When the right person comes along, nothing can stop it. And that's a good thing, because in the end, everyone deserves happiness.